Welcome. I'm Sebastian Mahfood, and you're listening to WCAT Radio, the on-air wing of En Route Books and Media, bringing you the dulcet sounds of Catholic wisdom.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Pat Flynn Show. I am joined once again by one of my favorite people to talk to. His name is Dr. Kevin Vost. Kevin, thanks for taking the time to join me again.
It is always my pleasure, Pat. Thanks for having me.
So this has to be your probably your fourth or fifth time coming on the show, and I do mean it. You're one of my favorite people to talk to. You're an awesome generalist, and whenever we have a conversation, there's usually around 5 to 10 different topics I'd like to discuss with you. But why don't we just go back a little bit, and in case this is the first time that somebody is hearing you or hearing us having a conversation. Can you give us a little background about who you are, what you've been doing, and what you're working on now?
Sure. Just, basically in general, academically, my training, I'm a psychologist. I worked for 32 years doing disability work for the state of Illinois and for Social Security disability, was a part-time college professor. Now I write books for Catholic publishers on themes of psychology, things like biographies of the saints. Almost all my books focus on St. Thomas Aquinas because I'm a huge fan of his philosophy and theology. My other side interests include philosophy, especially Aristotle and the Stoics. I'm married, have 2 adult sons, live here with my wife, try to keep pretty busy. I still go to the gym almost every day. Oh yeah, that's the other thing. Since early childhood, I have just loved working out, especially weightlifting, Olympic weightlifting, powerlifting, bodybuilding, things like that, and other forms of general fitness. So that started since childhood and goes on to this day. I'm 58 years old now and just had a workout this morning, which is, I don't know how many thousandth workout that would make, but I still love doing it.
So I think a good kicking off point for our conversation is right before I hopped on our recording software here, I saw that you shared an article. I think it was Business Insider that was examining some recent studies. Was it by I think Harvard was one of the institutions, showing that exercise is more likely to make you a happier person than money. Now, I didn't get a chance to actually read the article yet, but you shared it, so you must think there's something to it, huh?
Oh yes, and this is one again. I actually just saw it a few minutes before I came on, and I skimmed it and I looked through it. I saw at one point it was saying that people who exercise were happier than people who didn't, who made up to at least $25,000 a year more. So your workouts, I guess, are worth at least $25,000 in terms of a year in terms of your happiness. But yeah, this particular one I didn't look at yet in great detail, but I'm noticing all the time these kinds of articles are turning up. One that caught my eye just a couple weeks ago was talking about the effects of strength training and leg strength in longevity. Mm-hmm. We've known for a long time that for some reason people's grip strength is a good predictor of longevity. They've also found that people's leg strength is a good predictor of longevity. So it's really important to us, to our mental and physical well-being, to keep ourselves fit and strong. It can make us happier. It may make us live longer, but it'll certainly make us be more functional while we're still here.
What I would be interested in seeing, and I don't know if I can think of any research that has explored this topic much, but I know it happened. They've done it with money, where they realized that if you're below a certain amount of income, you're definitely you're less happy. But once you hit a certain threshold, and that threshold, I forget exactly what it is, but it was lower than I was expecting, and I think it's lower than what people think. Your sort of marginal utility of happiness quickly drops off, which just proves the old adage that money doesn't buy happiness. But having a certain degree of money can certainly save you from misery, which seems to be true as well. I wonder what that threshold is with fitness as well. Maybe you have some thoughts on this.
Yeah, that's a good thing. And of course, even with the money, it also reminds me of the good old, Aristotelian golden mean of virtue. Not too little, not too much. That just applies in so many areas, so many aspects of our life. For me, in terms of fitness, but you're right. If we become obsessed, if it takes over too big a part of our life, it can make us very unhappy. If we get this compulsion that we have to work out for hours every day, our life is just not right if we miss it, or we become so obsessed, with the food that we eat that the rest of the family has to have a completely separate diet from us, and it can cause distress if we go overboard. So there is some happy medium there. I think in general, we can look at our training and say, does it interfere with the other important tasks in our life? And if so, we're probably overshooting that golden mean. And also, our training should make us stronger and actually feel better and more energetic. So if you're feeling wiped out, if you come home from your workout and you're tired, just not for an hour or two afterwards, but if you really can't do what you're supposed to do the rest of the day, then you've probably overshot the mark there.
Yeah, I'm really interested in exploring this with you. And maybe we could think about how Aristotle and Aquinas might have looked or viewed the proper role of fitness. But let's back up a little bit, because I think it's pretty obvious that the reason people engage in a fitness program or try to make money is because they are seeking their own happiness. They think and sometimes they get it wrong, because they think, I'm at 7% body fat, but if I could just get to 6% body fat, then I'll be happy. Then all my problems will be solved. But that certainly isn't the way that Aristotle and Aquinas and a lot of these classical thinkers looked at happiness or a good life. So can you kind of take us into their mindset and how they would talk about what a good life is, how to really find flourishing, and maybe we can start to tie that into the role of fitness specifically?
Sure. I think, Aristotle and St. Thomas Aquinas both place a huge value on virtues, or arete, excellences in Aristotle's Greek. And there's many ways to look at this. We talked about the golden mean, not too much, not too little of the right things, just the right amount. I also like to think of it when they talk about it in terms of virtues are perfections of our powers. I think God gave us all kinds of powers. We can think, we can reason, we can remember, we can discipline ourselves. We can do all kinds of these mental things. We also have physical powers for strength, for endurance, for skilled activities. And for Thomas and Aristotle, we tend to become the happiest when we develop these virtues, when we give ourselves the greatest control over our bodies and over our emotions and passions by developing them. And when we do that, when we become closer to what we ultimately could be, we tend to become happier, because in some sense, we have a much greater control over our own destiny, a much greater ability to accept hardships. And Aristotle and St. Thomas noted too the parallels between the virtues of the soul and health and fitness as they relate to the body. So there's a great commonality there, and the one influences the other.
Yeah, it is very interesting too, because I think at least in modern society, people think of happiness with essentially equivocating, or making it equivalent to, I should say, a certain brain state, like a certain level of serotonin or dopamine. But that wasn't exactly how Aristotle and Aquinas saw happiness, was it?
No, not at all. They saw it, happiness would be, it really would involve growth in your ability to pursue the truth and to pursue what's good. So for them, we become happy when we make ourselves, a wise person, a knowledgeable person, a caring person, a virtuous person. So in that way, you can look upon yourself, without excessive guilt, without excessive desire, and really feel happier that you're focused on what's really important. You're focused on doing the right thing, within your own power, and you're not as driven by these external goals, external pleasures, or brain states that we might get, yes, through taking the right medication or maybe the right brand of whiskey or drugs. I know I like a little bit of that myself, but
sure, yeah,
try to keep that within the golden mean as well.
Yeah, it's funny. I was at a conference not too long ago down at Villanova, and somebody was presenting a paper on happiness according to Aquinas, and he said that the happiness is engaging. His way of phrasing it was happiness is engaging in and enjoying a genuinely good activity. Would you say that he is on the mark with that?
Absolutely. There's so many angles to approach this, and I think that it's truly an excellent one. Yes.
Mm-hmm. And then, you know, some people were bringing up some common questions or objections. A classic one was exercise, and another one was penance. It's like, hey, when I'm under the squat rack or I'm doing penance and I just went to confess, like, would that qualify? And then, of course, the answer was generally yes, because we're not equating happiness with just high serotonin levels or things like that, but we're looking at moral development, that certain periods of suffering can really shape us in a positive way.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. You know, and that's another way that we see the interaction in terms of the virtues. I've written about exercise using the virtue of fortitude or courage, but, you know, it really comes from the word strength, fortis, like we fortify things, you know. Mm-hmm. So fortitude is a virtue we can apply in the gym. It's our ability to do hard things in pursuit of a good, in pursuit of making ourselves stronger, healthier, more functional, more able to do what we need to do in our lives, and more able to do what we need to do to help others. Just yesterday, I put a little bit of that into practice when my wife called me out to carry all these, barrels full of lawn waste up to the front.
How fun.
There's practical advantages to having this kind of stuff.
Yeah, we actually just sold our house, so we've been hauling everything out to a pod right now, and it's amazing how much you can go and want to spend your energy in the gym and then not want to do it around the house. But, you know, things need to get done, and it's good to have the strength available when you need it.
Yeah, absolutely. I remember once when the kids were little and we were putting up this heavy-duty wooden swing set for them. And the grandpas were there, I was there, and we miscalculated, and something wasn't fitting just right. We were just missing with about an inch before to slide some bolt in the right place. So I remember I was able to get underneath it, put my back on the ground, and leg press that piece into the proper position so they could then bolt it in. And it stayed up there for about 15 years until high winds took down an oak tree and drove the thing straight into the ground.
Oh, wow. How about that? Yeah, look, balance, dexterity, coordination, flexibility, all good things, but occasionally you just need some of that brute strength, you know?
Yeah, it can be helpful.
That's great. So coming from the perspective of a psychologist then, especially in today's society, what other insights do you think have we either lost or should be reminded of by thinkers in the Aristotelian or even Stoic tradition of living a good life, of flourishing? I mean, we've been touching a lot on exercise, and I'm certainly happy to explore that further. It's obviously a great theme of our show. But I think one thing we've found so far is that it can't just be that. There has to be other components at play here. So when we're thinking about the life as a whole, the symphony of our life, and what makes a good symphony or a bad symphony, what are some of these other virtues or activities, genuinely good activities people should be considering?
Yeah, well, one thing that first comes into mind that in some ways we may be losing now is what psychologists kind of made famous in the 50s, calling the locus of control. You know, either internal locus of control or external locus of control. And with the external locus of control, the idea is that people just think that they blame outside influences for like everything going on in their life. They very much focus on, and we see today, I think, in our idea of being a victim. Some people try to outdo each other in their own victim state so they can claim the way they're not happy because what some other group of people has done to them or some institution and so forth. Whereas the internal locus of control is more focused on, how you can have an influence on your own life. And maybe even if things externally aren't going well, you can still choose to be happy. You can still make the best of it. And, although the psychologists wrote about this, maybe mostly starting in the 50s, as Julian Rotter and others, it always brings me back to the ancient Stoic philosophers, especially Epictetus. He says, people are disturbed not by things, but by the views they take of things. So it's essentially like a big, strong endorsement of that internal locus of control on the things that we truly can control. And that's somewhat limited. Even with our health, we can try to do everything right, but due to genetics, due to an accident, something can still go wrong there. But no matter what happens to us externally, we still do have some capacity to determine our own psychological reaction to it, to refuse to let external things crush us, to go ahead and be happy despite hardships. And I've been fortunate through the years to meet people who have just had like amazing hardships, one thing after the other, suffering all kinds of interpersonal losses, physical losses. And some of these people are the most buoyant, inspiring, and happy people I know. So I think it's a lesson we need to keep in mind, that we can go a long way towards ensuring our own happiness, even when bad things happen to us.
Yeah, it's one of those perennial truths that's shared, maybe not within every religion or philosophical school, but many of them. You see something like that, obviously, in Aristotle and the Stoics. You see something like that in Taoism, Buddhism, Confucianism. You certainly see something like that in Christianity as well. But then in today's society, you're right. There's this kind of always looking outside and to the external circumstances, and okay, where can we cast the blame? Whose fault is it that I feel this way? But there's also that kind of trap too that falls out of a materialist way of thinking of this sort of fatal determinism. How can we start to think about that and start to realize, yes, we actually do have free will. We don't have maximal autonomy, obviously. Like, we can't choose to fly, and we can't choose where we were born. But that isn't what we mean by free will anyway. So how would Aquinas start to think about this, and some of the other thinkers? Because I think what kind of helps people to justify this blame game or this victimhood mentality is they think that, everything is just a long string of dominoes, and they really had no say in the matter to begin with.
Yeah, that is an interesting dilemma, within psychology. But I think people like Aristotle and Aquinas have really resolved that very well, hundreds or even thousands of years ago. Because one thing I always think, the people who do believe that everything you do is just a result of some long chain of dominoes going back to the beginning of time, then it would, of course, that would also imply whether you believe in determinism or whether you believe in free will, that belief itself was a result of these dominoes. So there's really no chance for an actual argument there. But in terms of the will and free will, according to Thomas Aquinas, by our nature, we will what's good for us. We want to be happy. So in that way, we're always trying to will what we think will make us happy. But we have, we can vary greatly in the knowledge of what truly will make us happy or won't. So in terms of our free will, in a sense, we always desire the ultimate good. But we can choose different means to that good. We can choose different goals which represent good to us. Thomas says one way we can see the exercise of free will is like whether we decide to employ it or not, whether we decide to make a decision or not. I think maybe procrastinators can relate to this. They know well they have some important decision to make and that they can make it, but they try to put it off because they don't want to face it. So that's an act of free will, just deciding not to make a free choice for a time period. And then, of course, we have the free will of selection between alternate means, alternate courses of actions, when we try to weigh them, hopefully logically, and decide what we're going to do.
Yeah, so seeing that there's a sort of ground and consequent relation here, not necessarily a direct physical cause and effect, I think is possibly one helpful way to think about it as well. Somebody else I come back to on this, and even though I don't think she probably had the general metaphysical worldview to support it, was Ayn Rand, who just said, like, look at your ability to focus, right? Right. Let's just look at that was kind of her classic argument in defense of free will. Now, how she reconciled that with the rest of her metaphysics, I'm not exactly sure, but I think she always made a good point in that direction. And I mean, for me, it's just one of those things. It's just such an obvious and kind of like basic, properly basic belief, right up there with consciousness and external world, that clearly, even though there's a bit of a mystery there, we do have the ability to make choices and self-direct, if you will, and start like new causal chains or sequences of events. But I think it's important to make these arguments, because I've seen a lot of people kind of fall into this determinist trap and this determinist line of thinking. And I think part of it is, and you're the psychologist, so I'll let you do the psychoanalysis here, but it seems a lot of it is a sort of rationalization process to kind of, move away from having to focus on that internal locus of control of not wanting to kind of assume that personal responsibility to develop in virtue, but enable somebody to keep kind of pointing outwards and casting outwards the blame. I'm not sure if you have any further thoughts on that.
Oh, yeah, sure do. And I agree. Ayn Rand had a lot of good insights about human psychology. I think, it might be referring to one of her famous slogans, that the fundamental choice for us is to think or not to think. We can reason through things and make a rationally informed choice, or we can just go with the flow, go with what others tell us, go with what's customarily done. So I think she has a valid point there. And it calls to my mind another harmful trend in our day. Ayn Rand was a big fan of Aristotle. She actually admired St. Thomas Aquinas too, because he was such an Aristotelian. She's also a great fan of the founding fathers and the fundamental principles of the United States of America, because she was born in Russia and she prided herself on choosing to come to this country. But what I'm seeing now in our country, it is of this erosion of freedom of speech. I hear time after time a certain person is invited to speak on a college campus. The students make a protest and try to keep them from speaking at all. So here we have this idea, that we're not going to think, we're not going to allow people to challenge our views and then debate them and try to win over them. We want to silence them. So I think this is a strong example of just choosing not to think, and in a sense, not allowing others to think out loud if their thoughts don't match with yours.
Yeah, and that is a really scary thing, because when you think about it, if we don't allow for argument, if we don't allow for verbal disagreement, then what do we have? And it doesn't seem like we have many other options. One is that we just maybe hope that everybody will just tolerate each other, but that doesn't usually seem to be the case. Like once we lose the argument, it seems like the other option, and the one that typically happens, is some form of violence. And I guess that's what alarms me the most, is once you kind of try to limit and suppress speech and you try to stifle argument, then what you get first is a bunch of hysteria and shouting, but then pretty quickly it devolves, we should say, into violent acts. And I think we've already seen a number of instances of exactly that.
Oh yes, I mean, it's the old logical fallacy of the argument ad vacuum, argument to the stick.
Yeah.
Might makes right, and that idea has been around for a long, long time. But I think we're seeing it today, more than before. The complete shutdown of argumentation. And the thing is, if we want to get along peacefully, well, the one thing that all human beings do have in common, is the ability to reason, to look at evidence, to speak to each other, to advance arguments, to weigh them pro and con, and then hopefully in some cases to arrive at agreement. But when you completely shut another side down, especially through violence suppression, you're really cutting off the essential humanity that we all share.
Yeah. So I think this is a nice tie-in to virtue ethics as well, and to be able to go back to Aquinas and Aristotle, because I think both of them would agree that that it is a good thing, if not the highest thing in life, to pursue truth, to really contemplate the good. And it certainly seems like if that is even going to be a possibility, we have to allow for disagreements. We have to allow for argument, because there's probably no other way for us to go from states of understanding less to understanding more if we aren't able to battle out our ideas in a civilized fashion, in a way that we can really sit down and we can strongly disagree with somebody, but still get along with that person, still be friends with that person. And it seems like we're losing that, and I see that as a huge detriment to society, because if Aquinas is right, if Aristotle was right, we're kind of losing the purpose and meaning of life there. Is that taking it too far?
I don't think so. Because they sort of the fundamental of humanity is that we have intellect and will. The Aristotle says we're rational animals. Thomas would say this is the way that we're made in the image and likeness of God, that we can think, we can determine truth, and we can do good things, we can make good choices. So it really is fundamental there. The Aristotelian and Thomistic approach to virtue ethics is essential in our time.
So let's now try and draw the distinctions between Aristotle and Aquinas, because most people rightfully see that he was clearly very influenced by Aristotle, but he didn't go all the way with Aristotle. I mean, one of the biggest differences is Aristotle famously claimed that we could never be friends with God, but clearly Aquinas couldn't have taken a more radically different position than that, being the Catholic that he was and the theologian that he was. And beyond the sort of the cardinal virtues or the natural virtues, he helps us to understand the theological virtues. So how do you see the relationship there? Is Aquinas, is he contradicting, or is he arguing against Aristotle, or is he really just kind of finishing the project that Aristotle was starting off on?
That's a great question, because boy, wouldn't it have been something if Aristotle could have been in Thomas's time, if they could have discussed things with each other. Because yes, Thomas does not blindly follow Aristotle. I mean, he finds a great wealth of truths in the writings of Aristotle. And he also finds errors, fundamental issues where he disagrees. And he makes that clear too. And just because he disagrees with Aristotle, even in some very important things, like you said, that God is more than just an abstract principle, God is an actual love, God is a relationship, he can still make use of Aristotle in everything he got right, including some of the most fundamental principles of reasoning, and making logical arguments. Thomas cites Aristotle. I just had these numbers up the other day for some writing I was doing, but I think something like 1,500 times Thomas cites Aristotle within the Summa Theologica, which is over 3,000 pages. But he cites St. Augustine even more than he does Aristotle. Mm-hmm. So Aquinas, he's pulling his truths from everywhere. He cites other philosophers, the Stoic Seneca. He cites from Plato and others. So he's just very, very eclectic in his sources of knowledge. The way I look at it, I think Aristotle, who is completely on the right track, I think he's the highest expression of natural virtue, of natural wisdom. Mm-hmm. But Thomas also then weds this with, Christian revelation, the revelation of God, and then, which in my opinion takes it to a far higher and new level.
What an interesting tie-in here, because when you look at Aquinas, I think that this should probably be our model for the university. He's not shutting people down who have radically different opinions than him. Rather, he's saying, no, there is truth in this pagan philosopher. There is truth in this Muslim philosopher. There's truth in this Jewish philosopher. Let's hear their ideas and let's argue it out. So he's synthesizing. He's so open to people from different perspectives, and because of that, I think both of us would argue it produced an enormous wellspring of knowledge that we still benefit greatly from today. But what he didn't do was just shut down anybody who was coming from a different perspective. That's very interesting, isn't it?
Yeah, and that's exactly his method. If you look at his Summa Theologica, every single issue, he starts with these objections, what other people have laid out, arguments contrary to what are going to be his own conclusions. But he expresses them fully and clearly. He doesn't set up straw men, He doesn't give fake, weaker arguments. He gives very, very powerful arguments. And just one little tidbit I remember, I wrote a book on the 7 deadly sins a few years ago. It was based mostly on Thomas Aquinas' writing. And in his book on evil, remember, he's talking about this idea of the 7 deadly sins. This list isn't specifically in the Bible. It comes down through tradition, different church fathers of the East and West. The guy that kind of finalized the 7 we talk about now is this Pope St. Gregory the Great. Mm-hmm. And one of Thomas's first questions is, did Gregory come up with the right list of 7 deadly sins? I remember, I think it's 23 objections. He starts with 23 different arguments why this is not really appropriate and gives them logically and clearly before he then gives his own answer, and then one by one shows where these other arguments, where they were lacking. So that is just the whole spirit of St. Thomas Aquinas. Respect and hear the people who came before you and seek truth with them. You may agree with them at times, other times you may find a different truth.
It's funny, there's a term that goes around now. It's the opposite of straw manning. They call it steel manning, where you purposely try to reinforce and present the strongest version of your opponent's argument. And as soon as I heard that term, Aquinas popped right into my head. I mean, that's exactly what he did. He often stated the opposition's argument in ways better than they stated it themselves.
That's right. That is so correct. Yeah. I mean, he set up the steel man. He set up Superman arguments instead of straw man. And I think, we definitely see that in Thomas. He sometimes explains it better than they themselves explain their arguments. And another parallel, Thomas, cites from Aristotle. He also wrote commentaries on several of Aristotle's books where he comments on every single line Aristotle wrote in those books. And some people have argued you can get a better understanding of Aristotle from Thomas than you can from Aristotle himself because of his great perspective and his great way of making things clear.
Oh, I would certainly agree with that, and his commentary on Boethius as well. And
yes.
It's just and the thing that amazes me, and I think perhaps you can share some insights on this, is just the sheer amount of volume of work that this man produced in a time when there were no smartphones, there was no internet, and yet we live in an age of where we have information, anything we could want at our fingertips. And I myself could never imagine producing anything even 1/8 of 1% to either the quantity or quality of Aquinas. Like, what was going on there? What were the skills this man developed? How did he have such focus? How did he have such discipline? What insights can we learn from him just on his approach, his work ethic, all of that?
Yeah. Now Thomas, I think, in an intellectual sense, we could call him a generalist because his interests were far and wide. The Scripture, all the writings of church fathers, the writings of Greek and Roman philosophers, the writings of Jewish thinkers, of Arab Muslim thinkers. So, boy, he was interested in everything. But there was a sense in which he was a specialist in which, the scholarly research was his life, along with holiness, along with living the Christian life. But yeah, he was totally devoted to study from the time he was a young child. He actually died, we believe he was 49 years old.
Which is even crazier to think about, because like, even if you imagine he lived to 110, you still wouldn't be able to comprehend how he did as much as he did. He died before he was 50.
Yeah, he did. What am I? I'm like 9 years older than he ever was. I'm working on my 19th and 20th books. And you put those all together, they're not half of what's in Thomas's Summa Theologica. And he did all kinds of writing besides the Summa Theologica. As you said, before computers, before word processors, it was actually even before the printing press. So very, very amazing. A man just dedicated to study. A man obviously gifted with an unusually powerful memory, and intelligence. People of his time comment on this. What he would read, he almost instantly remembered. Some people think he dictated the Summa Theologica from memory. To my knowledge, they've not yet found actual notes that he wrote for that.
Wow.
And he would dictate to transcriptions. He says sometimes 3 or 4 at a time, sometimes even on different topics, moving from one to the other.
Yeah, just incredible to think about. There's I mean, he's obviously one of my favorite people to study, and for so many different reasons, for philosophy, for theology, for his work ethic, his commentaries, how charitable he was in engaging with opponents, his ability to synthesize as well is truly incredible. Now you've got another project coming up with and is it focusing on Aquinas?
Yes, this main book, I'm within a couple of days of finishing the first draft, is going to be called 12 Eternal Life Lessons from St. Thomas Aquinas, Timeless Spiritual Wisdom for Our Turbulent Times. Well,
as we wrap up here, would you mind maybe giving us a sneak peek of what people can expect in this one?
Sure. I try to kind of, for each chapter, I start with kind of a pithy little saying, and then I expand it with an explanation. And then I give a question, and then I give an answer from Thomas, and then I explain what all that means. Let's see if I can give one example.
That'd be great.
Because some of them are kind of twists on the common slogans in our day. So let me give you the one I do for chapter 4, just to give you a sense real quickly. Get to the start of this.
Look at that. A special sneak peek on the Pat Flynn show. This is exciting.
Yeah. Now, I must give a caveat. This is before it sees the editor, so maybe none of this will see the light of day.
Fair enough.
Here's how it's written so far. Lesson 4. And I call it, life lessons, eternal life lessons. I have justice begins at home. So it's a play on the phrase charity begins at home, right? Mm-hmm. And then I say underneath that, all justice is social, but it must begin within our own souls. Then I have a question for chapter 4, question 4. How can we be just within an unjust society? Then borrowing from Thomas's Summa Theologica, the style there, I put Thomas answers that, because in his Summa he always says, I answer that. Mm-hmm. And here's what he answers. This is Thomas's own words. Justice is a habit which makes a man capable of doing what is just and of being just in action and in intention. And then I kind of explicate that throughout the chapter. I talk about this, what we hear of social justice and whether Thomas ever used that phrase and how all justice is actually social by its own definition. Talk about how 8 or 10 different kinds of justice that Thomas talks about. And then I try to apply it to some kind of hot issues of our day.
Yeah, and one thing I really love about your work, and I want to make sure that we get a chance to mention it, and I'll link it in the show notes as well, is that you're both very thorough and very accessible at the same time, and I love that so many of your books you can kind of just you can pick them up, you can turn to a certain chapter, you can just kind of almost like a buffet of knowledge. They're really good stuff. When can we expect this new one? Do we have a tentative release date yet?
I think so. I'm supposed to have it to the editor by April 30th, which I will. And I think they're thinking in terms of fall, probably maybe September or October, but it could change. And that will be Sophia Institute Press.
Fantastic. Well, we'll definitely have to have another conversation before then to dive a little bit deeper. But in the meantime, Dr. Vost, if you wouldn't mind giving us some starting points for people who are new to your work, perhaps maybe a few starting book recommendations and where people can go to follow along with you and everything you're doing.
Sure. I think I have 18 books out there now, and half of them are with Sophia Institute Press, so that would be a good place to start, including my most recent one, How to Think Like Aquinas. My first book was called Memorize the Faith. It has all these special memory techniques that St. Thomas and his teacher, St. Albert, actually wrote about. I've done a couple on fitness. The first one was called Fit for Eternal Life, and then also some biographies of saints, Irish saints, Dominican saints, St. Albert the Great. If anyone would go to one of the major online booksellers or just do an internet search, I'm sure you can find information on all my books. Oh, and also my own website is drvost.com, just drvost.com.
Fantastic. I'll link that in the show notes. Also, be sure to link back to some of our previous episodes as well. I know we covered your conversion story in one of those episodes of how you moved from for very long, considering yourself an atheist, back into the Catholic Church. It was a really powerful story. I want to make sure that if people haven't heard that, they get a chance to explore that as well. Always a pleasure talking to you, Dr. Vost. Like I said, a million things I could sit here and talk to you all day, but it just gives me a reason to invite you back on at a later date. So thanks for taking the time.
I always love it, Pat. I mean, it's just such a joy that you can talk about so many things with so much knowledge and interest yourself. I always look forward to these.
We hope you enjoyed the program and will join us back for another show on WCAT Radio. This is Sebastian Mahfood. Good day.